Hello students, today we will be talking about the work and economic life. The syllabus is small, the questions which are there are basically coming from the organizations or division of labor or sometimes from the informal sector. So it will not be taking much time to talk about this one. Though in the same work and economic life, you will also be concerned with the globalization and its impact. And there sometimes you find about the questions in terms of feminization of labor, BPO industry, such kind of questions which come out that will be taking you to the second paper as well. So when we are talking about the work and economic life, only one reading there. You do not have to go so deep in terms of developing the concepts, because the concepts have already been developed. Once you have done the thinkers, right from Karl Marx to Durkheim to Weber, even to Parsons, the certain dimensions of economic sociology has come to you. Now where we are looking at, we will be having a very brief introduction in terms of the economic sociology. A very brief understanding of economic sociology. And we also talked about the sociology of work and occupation, now which you prefer the term. In this very perspective, sociology of work and occupation, I don't know whether the question has not been asked, but there could be certain perspectives. That is basically sociology of work. It could be looked from the certain theoretical dimensions like functionalist, you are aware of, conflict, symbolic interactionist, and there could be a question in terms of the feminist perspective. Once you have done this one, then you will be finding about division of labor. Some questions have been there. Either they have asked the questions in terms of Durkheim and Marx, and the other question has been there that how the manual labor is decreasing and there is an increase in a non-manual labor. So these were the certain dimensions which will be picking up division of labor, the changing division of labor. And then the questions can be there from formal and informal organization. It means we are basically talking about sociology of organization. And once you've done this one, though this is not written in your syllabus, but you talk about the impact of globalization. But if you remember, I had told you that when you're talking about the economic sociology, the unit 6, you also try to have its link with that of the second paper in terms of part C, unit 3, where industrialization and urbanization has been there. I had also told you that when we are talking about, or when you will be talking unit 6 and 7, in a very brief, we will also be looking at the relationship between sociology, economics, sociology and polity. Here, since we are concerned with the work and economic life, then we will be looking at in terms of the relationship between sociology and economics. However, let me make it very clear that when we talk about economic sociology, then the two things has to be remembered. That economic sociology is not a little economics what the sociologists practice in a sideways. Number one. And to understand economic sociology, we basically needed to place it within the broader framework of sociological discourse. Because it is a sociology that will provide its orientation to its different branches. So when we talked about the sociology, we said about it how sociology is all about, that you are aware of what sociology is all about. So define what sociology is all about. Sociology is the study of society. It's a study of human behavior. And then you also try to define what economics is all about. Economics is that branch of social science that deals with the human wants and their satisfaction. Now in this very perspective, you do not have to quote any scholar in terms of how the economics have been defined, but simply you talk about that it deals with the human wants and their satisfaction. Now similarly we will find about that how the goods and services they are produced, how the goods and services they are produced are distributed, and how the goods and services they are produced and distributed are eventually put to use, that is the consumption. But somewhere when we are looking at the sociology tries to understand that one in terms of the social milieu. And in this very perspective, we will be talking about that how the sociology and economics, they seems to merge, they seem to converge with one another. When you say economics is the study of consumption, production and distribution of goods and services, then we the sociologists also share that one, that interest. But we are also looking at it in terms of the broader social system. And then we are looking at the certain kind of cultural dynamics which may influence the behavior, which may influence this kind of process of production, distribution and consumption. And in this very perspective, sociology which is concerned with the study of institutions, associations of human beings, and thus somewhere we find about that there is interchangeable relationship between sociology and economics. And you might have come across that when you're looking at, we find about that how there is a great extent of interrelationship between these two subjects. For example, if I could quote Thompson or Thomas opines that economics is in fact but one branch of sociology. Similarly, Professor Silverman opines that economics is regarded as an offshoot of sociology, which studies the general principle of all social relations. Their interrelationship is there. Either we are talking about the material welfare, material dimensions. You find about that how we the sociologists, share that interest. But either in terms of the foci of interest, in terms of the theoretical perspective, in terms of the areas of interest, somehow or other, despite the certain kind of resemblance, they cannot be clubbed with one another. Now broadly, if I talk about sociology primarily studies the differences, then sociology primarily studies society and social relationship, whereas economics studies about wealth and a choice. This is the first difference. Now sociology emerged as a science of society very recently, whereas economics is comparatively an older science. Sociology is concerned as an abstract science, whereas economics is concerned as a concrete science in the domain of social science. Sociology generally deals with all aspects of social science, whereas economics deals with a specific aspect of social science, that is the economic aspect. Sociology in terms of a scope, sociology is a very wider scope in comparison to the economics. If sociology is concerned with the social activities of the individuals, then economics is concerned with economic activities. So that way you just make the certain kind of differences, and the relationship between sociology and economics could be understood by you. I am still saying, do not mug up certain definitions of economics and other kind of perspective. In your own words, you try to make the things understand in terms of the relationship between sociology. And wherever you pick up the relationship of sociology with other social sciences, not only in a very brief we talk about what the subject is all about, what the subject studies, but also try to look at the very perspective of convergence and divergence, on the basis of which we will be finding about the interdependence or interrelationship. So that will be the point of convergence, and a broader differences between the subjects that has to be highlighted by you. Now when we are looking at sociology, right since the inception of sociology, the discipline, the studies of social institutions have always been the prime concern. And even today, we are looking at the contemporary sociologists. We are studying the social institutions. So that a study of social institution which has been a prime concern, within which one of the most important institutions that has been studied by sociology or is being studied by sociologists is economic sociology. Right from the classical sociologists to the contemporary sociologists, somehow or other, in their works, the economic aspect of the social behavior, the economic behavior is being studied, the economic dimension is being analyzed by the sociologists. Economic institution, I said, can broadly be defined as the system of production and distribution of goods and services. It means how the goods and services are produced, how the goods and services that are produced are distributed, and how the goods and services which are basically produced and distributed are eventually put to use, that is the consumption. But economic institution or economic activity is not a totality in itself. In a sociological discourse, in a sociological perspective, we need to basically place this economic institution or economic sociology within the broader social system. Because social system will affect the behavior of individuals, in which this very perspective which we are talking about, the system of production and distribution of goods and services, that may show its variance from one culture to another. The cultural behavior may shape the economic activities as well. And that's why I said, once again I am using the term, that economic sociology has not to be viewed as a little economics, which we the sociologists are practicing in sideways. Rather, we are basically trying to understand the economic activities as a part of the broader social system in which this economic system is embedded to. And once you have demarcated this one, once you have analyzed this one, then we find about that how in a sociology right from the classical one till the contemporary one, whenever any social system, whenever any culture, whenever any society is being analyzed, the sociologists are also turning their attentions to the economic activities, which is one of the prime concerns today. And particularly after 90s and the way we are living in the globalized world. Now today, where the economy seems to be interchanged or interrelated with one another, interlinked with one another, no one can be said to be impervious to the process of globalization today. And in this very perspective, you basically need to talk about the economic activities, the economic institutions, and how the evolution of the economic institutions have also come. the evolutionary perspective, when we're talking about that, we find about that how the society has evolved from the hunting gathering to the pastoralist, to the agricultural, to the industrial mode. Sometimes we find about the word post-industrial in terms of Daniel Bell and others, Alan Turing. So that way, the evolutionary perspective through which how the, not only the society but also the economic activities have changed, in which the production is an important element, within which the land, labor, capital and entrepreneurship, they become the most important one. The nature of this, that is the land, labor, capital and entrepreneurship, would also be reflecting the kind of economic activities, economic system. And in this very perspective, when you look at your syllabus, syllabus begins in terms of the slave to the feudal to the capitalist society. And while talking about the Marxian perspective, we talked about the slave, feudal and a capitalist society. Even the capitalism was talked when we were talking about Weber. It means somewhere you do not have to do much in talking about the economic activities in the different societies, the various modes of production. Take your data from the broader theoretical dimensions what we have developed in the unit 4. Though it is true that today when we are looking at the way the technological progress has taken place, it has affected the economic institutions. So in terms of the contemporary changes, your focus should be on the technological changes, and more precisely that how the information and communication technology, which has sped up the process of globalization, has somewhere or other changed the economic activities. Because today, anything taking place in any of the remotest area has its repercussions in the other area as well. And that's why it says that no one said to be impervious to the process of globalization today, in which the ICT, technological progress, has played an important role. And once you have developed this kind of conceptual clarity, then you talk about that how the evolutionary transition that has taken place. And right from the classical sociology, if you talk about in terms of Auguste Comte, Herbert Spencer, a milder kind, even if you are not taking the conflict perspective, keep the conflict perspective constant, away. Then in the Marxian theory, when we are looking at the evolution of human society in general and Western society in particular, the evolutionary perspective could be found. And that way the changing modes of production could be understood in terms of this one. Emile Durkheim's use of the metaphor of mechanical organic, Weber in his economy and society, and precisely in terms of the economic organization, when he starts talking about the bureaucratic organization, we find about how the certain perspective of economic activities, economic sociology, is being enlarged. And one of the major work of Weber has been there in terms of Protestant ethics and the spirit of capitalism. Then Talcott Parsons comes out. When adaptive functions, I was talking about the AGIL, you find about how the economy is a subsystem whose medium of exchange is money. It means there are in numerous works right from the classical to the neoclassical, and today we the contemporary sociologists are more concerned with the new changes which is taking place in economic kind of perspective. The relation between economy and society has been an important preoccupation of sociologists. As is the social organization, so we have found about the economic organization. It means that interrelationship has to be talked about, within which we just talked about that how the relationship between economics and sociology has to be interpreted by you. Once you have talked about the evolutionary process, then you also bring about a certain dimensions from the conflict perspective. And in this very conflict perspective, through these two very basic perspectives of evolutionary and conflict, you can talk about the growth of this one. Very simply, the three revolutions have been the most important one, which have not only changed the discourse of human society, but they have also changed the very economic activities of the society. And these three important revolutions have been the agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, and today we are talking about information revolution. These all revolutions, the three revolutions which are talked about, have brought the paradigm shift in the economic system, which has further accelerated from the decades of 80s and 90s, in which the impact of globalization would be analyzed by us. We are now witnessing a shift from primary to secondary, secondary to tertiary, and that way the service sector, from production to the service sector, that is becoming an important one. So very brief conceptual dimensions in terms of shift from the production to the manufacture to the service sector. And from there, you would be able to anticipate some of the questions which have been asked to you. And you could also be able to anticipate that why this question came out. Today, we basically call it the sociology of work and occupation. And when you refer this branch of economic sociology as a sociology of work and occupation, then the very perspective of work becomes the most important one. And once you talk about the work, broadly the three theoretical perspectives, the functionalist, the conflict, and the symbolic interactionism or interactionist, have tried to analyze the work. For example, let me give you, the functions define work as a functional for the society. The work teaches people the value of society and thereby integrate them with the wider social order. This is the functional analysis, that how they view work. Whereas the conflict perspective, it basically says that work generates class divisions, differentiation, unequal rewards associated with the different kind of jobs or different types of works, thereby maintaining inequality and leading to exploitation. And the symbolic is interactionist. They say the work organizes social bond between people who interact with one another in the work setting. Similarly, you pick up the consequences, that how the functions will be focusing on the cooperation. The conflict perspective will basically be talking about the alienation. And the interactions perspective will be saying that as the interactive system is changing, the values changing, and the relationship between the people are also changing. And once you have defined these three theoretical perspectives in terms of work, then you add the family's perspective. That how in the family's perspective, it has always beginning with that how the work of women has always been devalued in relation to men. How her economic value has been denied. And that way you will be talking about what the concerns the families have talked about. The equal pay, equal remuneration. The equality in terms of the economic activities, the economic sphere. Asymmetry between the man and woman. And thus the feminist scholars started looking at that how the inequality which has been produced in society that now needs to be addressed, that needs to be challenged. And today, particularly from the 80s, how the feminization of labor is taking place. That in the labor force we are finding about the increasing number of the women's participation. And that way, we will be linking with the self-help groups and other kind of perspective as well. So broadly, when we are looking at the theoretical dimensions of work, so the three functionalist, conflict, symbolic, interactionist, but do also make a synopsis in terms of that what the feminists will be talking about in terms of this one. And then I said about that when you're looking at, you talk about these all perspectives in terms of the slave society, take the lead from the Marx, the feudal society and the capitalist society. In the sociology of work and occupation, one of the major unit of analysis has been division of labor. It is the most important dimension which the sociologists have basically tried to understand in the sociology of work and occupation. The way we started looking at the evolution of society from the simpler to the complex, pre-modern to the modern, in which the specialization, differentiation started taking place, which is further increasing. Thus, in the sociology of work and occupation, the analysis of division of labor becomes the most important one. In which the two works seems to be the most important one. I had told you that when you're talking about in terms of division of labor, then you talk about I'm just giving you the lines so that you are aware of here. This is the question so several times they have asked you. And we talk about that how he is basically talking about the mechanical and organic solidarity. This is the metaphor which he has used. In a Marx, we are talking about the two. There is a social division of labor. It's a natural one. It is based on the primordial factors of age and sex. It is basically to decide who has to do what. Its nature was not exploitative. But particularly from where the class started emerging, it brought about the exploitative division of labor. Though both Durkheim and Marx in division of labor will be talking about the consequences of the division of labor. One of the consequences of the Durkheim's division of labor would be anomy, which you are aware of. Economic crisis and anomy. Economic disorganization and anomy. And here, in terms of here, exploitative division of labor, we are finding about alienation, within which one will be talking about change in the system, one will be talking about change of the system. And that's why, if you are talking about here, I told you that you can also bring about a certain kind of relationship between this one. For example, if I could draw this diagram, this is anomy, Durkheim sociology. This is alienation, Marxian sociology. This is P is a psychological and S is a social one. Now look at mine. The nature of anomy is social. And particularly when talking about alienation, you find about how the psychological dimension that comes up. You just change the contour. That when we are looking anomy at the level of individual, here, then it would be alienation. And when we are looking alienation at the level of society, it would be anomy. Through this, we can bring about the perfect wedding between the French and the German tradition. And once you have done this one, then you will finding about the work of Weber in terms of the increasing rationality that has taken place in the West. And once you talk about the increasing rationality that has taken place in the West, we will be talking about the bureaucracy, which will also be looking at. Yesterday when we started talking about the Weber, we talked about the bureaucracy. I had said that this bureaucracy, whatever you have developed the conceptual understanding of bureaucracy, you will be using that in a formal organization as well. Because one of the best example of formal organizations in a sociology organization would be Weberian bureaucracy, for which you do not have to deal because you have done it. The thinkers have been done. You try to bring the data into segmentalized version and to be used in the different kind of units. That is the same thing we did in social certification in terms of the Marxian perspective, Weberian perspective, but which once you have done the thinkers, you know about their orientation, you know about their theoretical perspective, that has to be used. So here once you have done it, talk about Weber. And here, now you just bring about it how this very nature of division of labor is changing. And that nature which is changing is due to the technological advancement. And when you say technological advancement, we are finding about a shift from primary, secondary to the tertiary sectors. And in this very perspective, we are witnessing more specialization, more differentiation. And thus, if we talk about the John Pakulski, death of a class, that how today the sectors like coal, shipyards, dockyards, shipbuilding, they are declining. And this decline is basically leading to the decline of the proletariats. Today, education and professional qualification is determining your class rather than that very perspective which we are talking about in terms of class that we talked it. I quote that today division of labor has become more complex. Education and professional skills have become more important than the class background in determining the job opportunities. So class the background and the professional educational skills. Look at this change. And the proletariats, it has led to the decline of the proletariats. The coal, dockyard, shipyards, industries, they are declining. More professional and managerial class is emerging today. It means broadly the labor force is also witnessing a change from manual to non-manual labor. If I could use Ken Roberts, then Ken Roberts argues the decline of industries like coal mine, shipbuilding, dockyards works have collapsed. That technological innovation has increased productivity, though they have also ensured, or it has also ensured, that now fewer workers are required in the process of production. The new working class have emerged in supermarkets, security firms, tour and travel agencies, hotel and eating businesses, implying that there has occurred a substantial decline in the manual workers but rise in the non-manual workers due to technological innovation. So this is the one perspective that we will be talking about. That is your syllabus. I told you that economic, you do not have to give much time. 1 hour is enough because you know the theoretical dimensions. And apart from the division of labor, apart from in the sociology of work and occupation, apart from the theoretical dimensions of explaining the work, yet another perspective, apart from the division of labor, that becomes important in the sociology of organization. I don't know how will you react to this sentence of mine, that today when we are looking at the modern man, the entire life of modern man is determined and guided by organizations. If I could quote Adjoni, that we are born in organization, we die in organization. We are born in hospitals and we are burned in the obituaries. So we are born in organization, we die in organization. And it means today, in the modern times, the organization dominates every stage of man's life. In the analysis of organization, in the analysis of organization, if I could, I talked about Adjoni. And then broadly it could be divided into that's formal and informal. And the duality between these two have not only been emphasized by the economist, but the duality between these two, that is the formal and informal, has also been emphasized, is also being highlighted by the sociologists as well. Though their concerns may be different from one to another. When we are studying this duality of formal and informal one, we are placing it within the broader social system. The studies of organization in sociology broadly reflects the two broader insights. Now look at how the questions have been framed. When I say when you're looking at the sociology of organization, it reflects the two broader insights. One is from the perspective of Max Weber's bureaucracy. Which is the best documented example of the formal organization. This is the first insight that we are talking about. And in the sociology of organization, yet another broader insight has been the work by Frederick Taylor, the scientific management theory, the questions which are coming there, within which we will also be talking about the Hilton Mao, the rebel versus herd hypothesis, just I'll pick up. And in this very perspective, the two insights, Weberian bureaucracy and a scientific management theory of Taylor, somehow or other, they have broadened the very scope, provided a certain direction to the study of, or studies in sociology of organization. And then define what formal organization is. That formal organizations could be defined or could be viewed as a large, secondary, highly organized and complex organization in pursuance of the goals effectively. And thus it will be displaying the features like hierarchy, line in staff, written communication, a sphere of competence, remuneration. And in this context, once again I am saying, in this context, you simply bring about the analysis of Weberian bureaucracy, the 9 structural points which I last class talked about in this one. When you go more deep in terms of the formal organizations, Peter Blau, Scott, Adjoni, they have basically divided the formal organizations into normative, utilitarian and coercive. The normative organization is the one which people join to pursue goals which they personally consider worth or to attain satisfaction, or sometimes only for the social prestige, which has no monetary rewards. Whereas coercive organization is characterized by involuntary membership like prison, mental asylum, concentration camp. And in this very perspective, Irving Goffman, if I could quote Irving Goffman, he considered the coercive organization as total institutions, which is cut off from the rest of the society, and the individuals who become a part of it are subjected to strict regulation and control. The utilitarian organizations are large organizations which people join for monetary rewards. Obviously, Lions Club, charity वाले domains or normative organization हो गया. Prison, mental asylum, concentration camp, involuntarily they would be there in terms of the coercive organization. And the organizations, large organizations which were joining for the monetary rewards, for a career growth, they would be basically utilitarian organizations. Today, in organization, McDonaldization is emerging out. Ridger is the one who has used the McDonaldization in organization. And that is, this McDonaldization of organization is basically affecting the daily life of people. And Ridger is basically saying that today work, education, healthcare, all have become subjected to McDonaldization, where each industry is based on high and efficient productivity. Thus he outlines the features like calculativity, productivity, efficiency, control as a process of McDonaldization. Calculability, productivity, efficiency and control as the process of McDonaldization. A question, perhaps that could be one dimension in short note they could ask you. And if I talk about the David Silverman, it is the view that the formal organization with which sociology of organization is concerned with reflects 3 features. It means formal organization arrive at a certain time. Formal organization as an artifact exhibit patterns of social relationship which are less taken for granted but are well coordinated. And the third feature is that the formal organization, in a formal organization there is a considerable attention is paid to the nature of social relationship and also plan the change if it is required in them. And thus, in this context, you might have found about the certain questions. Earlier they started asking the questions in terms of Elton Mayo, social organization of work. But Elton Mayo cannot be understood unless and until you talk about scientific management of Taylor. That's why I said about when talking about the sociology of organization, the two broader insights which will be coming, one from the Weber, which we have used in terms of formal organization in the example of bureaucracy. And another insight has been there in terms of the scientific management theory of Taylor. The questions have started coming from the Taylorian perspective as well. The scientific management theory, SMT or Taylorism, is a theory associated with the Frederick Wilson Taylor, who is considered to be the father of scientific management. Taylor's work led to the foundation of modern management theories. It is a set of ideas aimed to increase productivity by breaking down each task into smaller tasks, observing them, timing them, and redesigning the work that is better coordinated. Taylor also always focused on the technical aspect of the work, as he believes that existing way of organizing work schedule is full of idleness and inefficient. Thus he observes that knowledge, rules and procedures governing an organization are relatively unsystematic. However, he believes that workers are lazy and try to avoid work, in which he talked about natural soldiering, that is inborn human behavior to avoid work, or inclination towards laziness, and systematic soldiering, that is the result of ill-designed workplace, allowing workers to conceive their jobs and hence control their own pace of work. And if we are talking about this one, this is basically a rebel hypothesis. And thus, once he has talked about the natural soldiering and systematic soldiering, then he comes out with the scientific management. And in this which he talks about it how, if the productivity has to be increased, we need to divide all tasks into smaller tasks. We need to observe them, time them, and if need be, we need to redesign the work, which will be better coordinated. It will enhance the productivity. So if the output has to be increased, then meticulously we'll have to plan. Every task has to be monitored, watched, timed and recorded. He also analyzed and measured the workers' movement and their task to determine how the task could be broken into simple parts to increase efficiency, for which he developed detailed rule and enforcement methods. And in this very process, he also talks about the certain kind of principles, like management will develop the science of each element to work, scientifically select them, train them, teach and develop the workers, cooperation between worker and management, and division of labor and responsibility. Though he was also referred to as an enemy of the workers, morally indefinite, indefensible, mechanizing and dehumanizing kind of one. So once you have talked about this, then remember one, when I always say that, remember one line. Technical worker is a more productive worker. This is the essence in one line of the scientific management theory of Taylor. When Mayo comes out with the Hawthorne experiments, he initiated the human relations approach. Satisfied worker is more productive worker. Here what you said? Technical worker is more productive worker. And here he is talking about the satisfied worker is more productive. And thus, when you are looking at, so you find about the social dimensions of work in a Mayo. Mayo has been a sociologist. So through his Hawthorne experiment, he promoted human relations approach. And this human relations approach, what was promoted by Elton Mayo, that basically shook the entire pillars of scientific management theory. The structure of formal organization also started introspecting with this work. The certain perspective of introspective analysis started taking place in the formal organization with this work of Elton Mayo. Mayo, with his different experimentation, initiated the social dimension of work, manifesting hard hypothesis. Now look at the hard hypothesis, that the workers are not unorganized. Rebel hypothesis, what we are talking about in terms of Frederick Taylor, has taken from the Ricardo. So when you talk about the workers in the work setting are not unorganized. You look at the herds, the animals, you find about how the strongest one would be encircling that one, encircling the weaker ones, the lactating one, the children's, the older ones, they all ought to be protected. And thus, opposite to the rebel hypothesis, he comes out with the herd hypothesis. And in this one, the Elton Mayo is talking about man's social position is in his work ranks first. When talking about the work, his social position is important. Individuals reduce the risk of predation by moving to a specific position in the group, implying that whatever happens is not random. Group is not disorganized, and everyone does not work for self-interest. It means that the social psychological factors at work and not the physical condition of work determine the worker's morale and output. Organization is basically a social system, and the workers are not isolated, unregulated, rather they are social animals. The non-economic rewards and sanctions do affect the workers' morale and output. The workers have a tendency to develop a small informal group setting in which they develop their own norms of production and behavioral pattern. Terms like rate booster, chiseler, they are used within which social dimension of work would be coming out. So once you have done this one, then you are now aware that why the questions have been asked. From Mayo, from Taylor, from Bavarian bureaucracy. You will also be finding about the questions in terms of alienation and anomie from the division of labor. And this way the formal organizations would be talked about. But I say that when you are looking at the sociology of organization, apart from the formal one, it's another dimension that will also be taken to the second paper, is basically the informal organization. The term informal sector gets back to early 70s when it was coined by Keith Hart in the study of Ghana to describe urban employment outside the organized labor market. Though we need to remember that post-Second World War, this sector has emerged in Western Europe and America, within which causal, dry workers or day workers, domestic laborers, part-time workers, without secured benefits or contracts comprise this category. Today, the informalization of activities have emerged out. When you are looking at the impact of globalization from the 80s, the two concepts will be coming out: informalization of activities, that increasing number of the workers in the informal sector, and feminization of labor, increasing number of women in the workforce. So today the way we are looking at the informalization of activities is more precisely in the third world countries, including India. Then it becomes very obvious in part of we the sociologist, the economic sociologist, to focus on the informal sector. And when we are looking at the job, when we are looking at the work setting, a maximum population of the country is basically involved somewhere or other in terms of the informal sector. So informalization of activities is increasing. The casual, the day workers, domestic laborers, part-time workers, who do not have any social security, who do not have any benefits, through which the way we are understanding the informal sector, that is basically enlarging in a 2 days' time. And look at the irony, that globalization is a Janus-based phenomenon. Janus is a Greek god of contradiction. Every current has a counter current. If at one hand technological advancement is bringing the possibility of the new kind of avenues, work avenues, occupational avenues, then it is also leading to the bifurcation of a labor force. At one hand we find about the well-paid professionals, on the other hand we find about the very low-paid, low-waged individuals, and the majority of them seems to be indulged into that one, more precisely in the third world countries. Though informalization of activity is not to be understood merely in the third world countries. This phenomenon is emerging in the developed countries as well. So not to relate that one only with underdeveloped and other kind of perspective. Relate this one. So in America, in Europe, Western Europe, we are finding about this kind of things which is emerging out. Though it is true that in terms of the third world countries, this informalization of activities is on the rise. And recently in 2020, if I am not wrong, 2021, I always say that these 2 years should be taken away from our life due to the COVID kind of perspective. And in this COVID break, the way we have found about the sluggish nature of economy, slowing down, curtailing of the work, closure of the factories and others, the pressure on the informal sector has further increased. And the informal sector participation has further broadened. And in this very perspective, we are looking at the informalization of activities. Broadly, the category includes a great variety of occupation characterized by self-employment, reflecting a great economic varieties of activities carried out by a large percentile of population in order to survive. These activities are not regulated anywhere. They may be clandestine in nature or outside the framework of formal organization. In the improvised kind of manner or improvised kind of manner, the way these people are working in this factor demonstrate that most of the people who are engaged in this, they are basically living in poverty and are found at the bottom of the social hierarchy, are found at the bottom of the urban landscape. The term became more popular in an international level. Organization adopted it as a part of its world employment program, sent teams on missions to examine the employment situations outside the modern organized large scale and labor intensive sector of economy, largely associated with the cities of Latin America, Africa and Asia. In the decades of 80s, I said about the informalization of activities started emerging out. World Bank will be turning its attention to the informalization of activities. McNamara at the time of this, the president, if I am not wrong, president of the World Bank will finding about that how the World Bank shifted its focus to the informal sector. And in this very perspective, this informalization of activities became one of the major subunits in the analysis in the sociology of organization. Conceptually, informalization is a process. This question has been there. So let me give you one line. Conceptually, informalization is the process by which the work is undertaken in the conditions, characteristics of informal economy. That is one in which economic activities are outside the formal organization, including labor laws, social security, health standards and safety rules. In some of the writings, the interpretation of informalization of work was done as a situation when there is a continuous decline in the percentage of workforce in the formal sector and a rise in the informal sector. So certainly if the percentage in the formal sector is decreasing, so somewhere this pressure is there on the informal sector as well. During 80s, the World Bank in its developed studies turned its attention towards this sector qualitatively, and particularly in those societies which were rural come agrarian, and where the process of organization began as a recent phenomenon. The informal sector is also called parallel unorganized shadow economy, in which employment model is informal and the social identity is composed of heterogeneous category of working people. The broad spectrum of activities are found, in which all those people who are indulged into the informal sector, we find about the common social profile. No formal training, majority being illiterate, low wage, lengthening of work hours, no social security, irregular pattern of work, higher participation of women and children, low status, and socially inferior origin. Even in India, the large participation in this sector is from backward Dalit, tribal women, children. Though today when we started, the globalization started, we find about that how. At an idea surface, that this is a sector which is running parallelly as a shadow economy, they need to be brought within the net of taxation. And thus somewhere the coercive kind of steps were initiated. But thank God today when we are looking at the shift in the governance, the attitude, that we are basically talking about formulation of informal sector, organizing the unorganized sector, and in terms of this, the colored assessment which was there earlier, that since most of the people who are working outside the formal one, they are working on the streets and other kind of one. They are not paying the taxes. So this colored assessment which was there earlier towards this unorganized sector, towards this informal sector, is now basically changing. The open hunt of workers which was earlier done, and certain sort of sympathetic, empathetic perspective is emerging towards it. Certain sort of regularized perspective is emerging in terms of this one, to regularize this one. And that way, this unit has to be done. Once you do this one, then you broadly bring about the impact of globalization. And look at impact of globalization in terms of the economic perspective. We are not talking about on the society as a whole. And then you talk about the social, economic and cultural dimension of globalization. Just give me 2 minutes, I'll take 2 minutes and I'll. Now once we started looking at the sociology of work and occupation, then we talked about the certain units, and I am once again saying that from the broader sociology and thinkers, whatever the conceptual clarity which you have developed, they are to be continuously used in looking at the different units of this work and economic life. Once the thinker is done, things become much more easier in part of you. And the duration of the classes will also decrease. Because if you are looking at the units, either social stratification, or you are talking about the economy, or even the polity, religion, somehow or other the same theoretical perspectives which you have developed, the same conceptual perspective which you have developed in the thinkers, we will be using them. Thus, the duration of the classes in your advanced course will decrease. And if time be, then once again I'll try to devote one day in terms of making you understand, recall back all the thinkers which you have talked about. So that way the things would be done. Now when we are talking about the globalization, particularly we are looking at that in the contemporary times or a contemporary world, There is hardly any socio-cultural, politico-economic realm which is said to be impervious to the process of globalization. Time and again I am saying it is basically, globalization is basically the interchange of various attributes among different societies. However, it is not a new phenomenon. When you look at the old history, the ancient history, we find about the exchanges between the civilizations. The interconnectivity between the economic activities of the two culture or two societies, which phase changed when we come to the colonization process. The foes and the friends, such kind of perspective in terms of the economic activities and interchanges that was characterized in the colonial period. So right since the beginning of the mankind, there has been an ongoing process of exchange and exchange of the economic activities, the items. Here the Griffith says that this very interchange has affected the entire history of mankind. Even the idea of modernization or globalization as an idea of modernization in a global market finds mentioning in the writings of Saint Simon and even Karl Marx. Though the contemporary trends differs in terms of quantum of interchange and interconnectedness between the societies, between the economies, the current process of globalization, which is basically or popularly described as a gradual removal of barriers to trade and investment between nations, started towards the end of the 20th century with the aim to achieve economic efficiency through competitive market. Though broadly it has been viewed in terms of that how the socio-economic development would emerge out. That how this interconnectedness, how this interdependence between the societies, the economies, exchange in terms of trade and commerce would be leading to the socio-economic development. Globalization is basically increasing global interdependence or interconnectedness. It is a process rather than an outcome. And thus it is basically referring to the trend towards the growing interconnectedness of different parts of the world. Anything that is happening anywhere in the remotest part of the world has its reverberations in the other parts of the globe as well. So when we are looking at the most common definition of present day globalization, then it has been referred to as growing integration of various countries of the world economy, resulting from free movement of capital, products and information affecting every sphere of human life. So in the technological one, the question which has been there, you can also, I said it, that you can bring about the globalization as well. Sociologically, when looking at the contemporary times, and if I could quote Anthony Giddens, he defines globalization as intensification of worldwide social relations through which faraway places are linked together in such a way that events in one place are affected by a process of taking place many miles away and vice versa. I repeat that Anthony Giddens defines globalization as the intensification of worldwide social relationship through which faraway places are linked together in such a way that events in one place are affected by a process taking place many miles away and vice versa. David Henderson viewed it as a model of fully internationally integrated market, meeting the condition of free movement of goods, services, labor and capital, resulting in a single market in inputs and outputs. The boundaries of the nations have shrunk. And thus, if we talk about Kenichi Ohmae has used the term the borderless world, whereas Malcolm Waters is merely implies greater connectedness and deterritorialization while analyzing globalization. So the two words which I have used, borderless world, deterritorialization. When you talk about the borderless, we are talking about the Kenichi Ohme. And in Malcolm Waters, we are talking about the deterritorialization. However, in the same process, when we are looking at the certain works of T.H. Erickson, Robertson, we find about the interrelationship between globalization and localization. The term they highlighted is called glocalization. That when we are talking about the process of globalization, you need to look at its relationship with the localization as well. So this very interrelationship between globalization and localization, for which the term which we are using is glocalization. Local issues are affected by globalization. It means globalization is continuously affecting or has the potentiality to affect the local issues. There is an accelerated globalization is taking place in which informalization, flexization and reconfiguration of states and regionalization is also taking place. It means globalization is basically a multifaceted, multidimensional and comprehensive phenomena having its potential impact on the whole range of contemporary issues, be it social, cultural, political, economic. There is emerging a very deliberate selection of market-oriented approach. The multilateral agencies are coming out, who are regularizing all this, those who are part of the globalization process. A universal blueprint of development is emerging out. Universal laws are coming out. Though sometimes competitive advantage between the nations could be found. It means when we are looking at, we find about that how globalization is benefiting only those who are rich. And in comparison to and when interaction between the rich and the poor countries, the major chunk of benefit is basically been usurped by the richer ones. That way, globalization is also increasing the inequality between the nations. The inequality which was there produced due to the colonization. And what was hoped when the globalization will come out, it will be beneficial to all those who have been participating into it. It has not been resulted. So you can also affect this also expect this kind of questions from there. I always say that globalization has not only led to bifurcation of the class division, but it has also led to the bifurcation in terms of the division between the nations. It has further increased the inequality. Inequality not between the classes but also between the nations. Now in this very perspective, you need to look at the economic dimensions, social and cultural dimensions in your economic sociology, sociology of work and occupation. In an economic dimension, the breaking of the national economic barriers, international spread of trade, financial and production activities, growing power of transnational corporation TNCs and TNBs, international financial institutions, expansion of information and communication technology, birth of information age, outsourcing of services and trade related intellectual property rights strips, they all would be included in the economic dimensions of globalization. And from here you have found certain questions in terms of BPO industry, the business process outsourcing. So it is basically the important part of the information technology enabled services, that is ITS. And outsourcing is a process through which one company hands over parts of its work to another company, making it responsible for the design and implementation of business process under strict guidelines regarding requirement and specification from the outsourcing company. The BPO services include customer service, interaction, including the call centers, back office operations, transcription services, content development, animation, data research, market survey, consultancy management, etc. These all would be there in terms of the BPO industry. And we talk about that how this BPO industry has basically brought about a new perspective, new avenues of job employability in the country like India. And this very BPO industry in India is basically built around the policy of efficiency and cost effectiveness. In the contemporary period, companies are increasingly outsourcing select business functions and related IT operations to export partners. India's abundant skilled manpower has made it a target destination for MNCs to back end their operations in India. India ranks high in the areas such as qualifications, capabilities, quality of work, linguistic capabilities, and work ethics. In a specific in terms of ITS, that is information technology enabled services, the categories Indian centers have achieved higher productivity level. For example, a number of transactions per hour for back office processing, then their Western counterparts, the opening of telecom sector in 1994, encouraged liberated private participation in IT sector. You pick up from there. And you find about that how a large number of youths and the women's, they have their participation in terms of the BPO industry. Once you have done this one, there is economic dimensions from where the BPO industry quotient has been there. Then you talk about the social dimension. The social dimension of globalization refers to the impact of globalization on the life and work of people, on their families, their societies, employment, working conditions, income, and social protection. It also includes security, culture, and identity, inclusion, exclusion. When we are looking at the globalization process, we are also witnessing the debate between roll back a state versus bring the state in. That in the liberalized, globalized perspective, it has also resulted into the general reduction in the role of the state. And role of the state not only in terms of the political one, but role of the state also in terms of the economic governance. Thus, expenditure on public spending has decreased. The consequences of the reduction is the role of government and public sector, and the replacement with the private sectors. It means that the process, the access of people to employment, capital, and social services, that is education, health, housing, will be very less. This may lead to social dumping. That is a process that lowers production costs through low wages and substandard social conditions. The current pace of globalization also results in causalization or informalization of workforce, which we talked about, causing low wages for laborers and less job of security. Though it created employment opportunities to some of the work, however, it is also true that liberalization of economy has in some sectors caused loss of employment without creation of new employment. And more precisely, we're looking at the work from home, this kind of things in the COVID which has started coming out, and we find about the impact. So we find about that how the curtailing of the jobs, these avenues comes out, and the further process has increased, unemployability has increased, the pressure on the informal sector has increased, that we just talked about. So you can bring that one. And this, when in the social dimensions of globalization, apart from this, the shift from the public to the private, less on public expenditure, declining or decreasing role of the state in economic governance. We talked about the informalization of activities or causalization of activities. Yet another dimension from where the questions have been asked or questions could be raised is basically feminization of labor. That is, the women have entered the labor force in large number in countries that have embraced liberal economic policies. Industrialization in the context of globalization is much female-led as it is export-led. the overall economic activities rate of women has tremendously increased, and the highest observations of women has been witnessed in the export-oriented industries. If I could quote Hillary, that especially the case in the export-producing zones and especially economic zones, SEZ, and those in labor-intensive industries that have relocated to developing countries in search of cheap labor, investors have shown a preference for women in soft industries such as apparel, shoe, toy making, data processing, and semiconductor assembling industries, which require unskilled and semi-skilled laborer. Though it also ensures a better status for women because they are participating into it. The certain kind of economic independence is emerging out. But most of such industries in which we are finding about the increasing percentile of women are highly labor intensive, service oriented, and where they are poorly paid. There is a lack of unionization. Collective bargaining becomes impossible. The conditions, the working conditions. So you pick up all these perspectives, the challenges before the working woman. And then you also need to talk about migration and urbanization. You also need to talk about rising inequalities and wealth concentration. And once you have done this one, economic and social, then come to the cultural dimension, in which few will be highlighted by you. That is the increased pace of cultural penetration. Stewart Hall. So how the cultural penetration is taking place due to the globalization? Globalization of culture is emerging out. There is a development of hybrid culture. There is a resurgence of cultural nationalism. And in the cultural dimension, yet another aspect is there in terms of the emergence of fundamentalism. And how there is a dissipation of the indigenous knowledge. And somewhere with this one, we will be finding about the TRIPS, trade-related intellectual property rights. So these all would be the part of the cultural dimensions. So in the economic sociology or in the sociology of work and occupation, apart from this one, just talk about the impact of globalization. In economic one, you will be talking about the BPO industry from the questions came out, I said about the exchange of goods, labor, capital. Then in a social one, the two dimensions we talked about, the more important one, the declining role of a state in terms of economic governance, casualization or informalization of activities, and feminization of labor from where the questions have come out. And in a cultural one, we will be finding about in terms of the resurgence of cultural nationalism, hybrid culture emerging out, the global cultural penetration, identity crisis. And in this very perspective, we will also be talking about fundamentalism. And you can also relate the terrorism in terms of this one with the globalization. So such kind of questions would be there, could be framed from there. Look, do not give much time, just give one reading, develop the concepts. Your major focus should be on the unit 4, that is the thinkers, time and again I am saying. At least give the 2 times to go for the thinkers. Once the concepts have been there, you would be able simply to use these thinkers into the different units. And most of the units which will be there in terms of your advanced course, apart from the thinker, they will be taking very less time. The more the broader aspects will be talked by me, and in that way the things has to be looked on. So this is the overall view on which the nature of questions, the anticipation of the questions, the theoretical perspectives on the work, the relationship between sociology and economics. And when we talked about the theoretical perspective of work from the punctualist conflict, symbolic interactions and feminist, then we talked about the division of labor. And in the classical writings, we started talking about it in terms of Durkheim to the Marx to Weber To the newer scholars, we're talking about looking at the shift. We talked about the John Pakulski, Ken Roberts. So that will be the certain questions could be, which has been there. You can talk about that one. Questions on alienation could be there from Marxian perspective in terms of the economic dimension. And now the questions which are coming out is basically from the formal and informal organizations. So in the formal one, Weberian bureaucracy, I talked in last class. So you have developed that one. Frederick Taylor, scientific management theory, and Elton Mao, the human relations approach you talk about. And then talk about the informal sector. And then lastly, we'll be talking about the impact of globalization in terms of economic, social and cultural dimensions. Alright? And that would be the conceptual dimension that we will have to develop in terms of economy. Alright? Thank you.